Okay. This is going to be the first of the three chunks of cellular respiration, glycolysis or glycolysis. Um, this is the first step in cellular respiration. Again, three big events: glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. We're just going to talk about the first one in this set of slides. If we look at how this plays out in the mitochondria, um, glycolysis actually occurs in the cytosol, which is the fluid of just your cells. It doesn't enter the mitochondria until we do pyruvate oxidation, which is the second half of glycolysis. So it does produce a little bit of ATP, but most of the ATP is made at the very end um, of respiration. So if we look at just glycolysis, we take glucose and we make pyruvate. A little bit of ATP is produced at this step and released into the cytosol to be used, but there is more made during the citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation, which is specifically in the mitochondria. Glycolysis is thought to be one of the oldest metabolic pathways because it can happen out of the mitochondria. It's thought that this was the first way that organisms made ATP before they had mitochondria. It is a process that occurs in the cytoplasm of both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, so it's believed that this was like the ancestral way of making energy or ATP. Basically what happens is we use glucose, which I'm ingesting, and we use NADPH to create ATP and pyruvic acid. The ATP is released as a little bit of ATP that's made. Specifically, I believe 6 are made total. 2 when glucose is split, and then 4 more when I'm making pyruvic acid. And so that ATP is just used in the body. The pyruvic acid is going to be passed on to the other parts of cellular respiration. Glycolysis harvests chemical energy by oxidizing glucose to pyruvate. Glycolysis is basically the splitting of sugar. It breaks down glucose into 2 pyruvate molecules, and it has 2 major phases. The energy investment phase, where I put energy in, and then the energy payoff, where I'm making more energy than I originally invested. Because this process wouldn't make sense if I had to utilize just as much energy to get it started as I got out, right? There's no point to that. Glycolysis is going to occur whether or not oxygen is present. So that means, 1, it could have happened way back when our atmosphere had no oxygen, and it can happen in organisms that don't breathe. So it can happen pretty frequently. The activation energy is put in. Basically, we're splitting the glucose or fructose, and then we harvest energy. What we are harvesting specifically, NADH, ATP, and then the pyruvates. The NADH and the ATP are just going to be used as energy by the body. The pyruvates are going to be passed on to other steps of cellular respiration. Again, if we look at the 2 phases of glycolysis, the splitting of glucose, you're going to make you're going to use 2 ATP. So that's my energy investment phase to split my glucose. The energy payoff part is once I've split my glucose, I'm making 4 ATP, 2 NADH, and 2 pyruvates. If you look at the very bottom box, it basically tells me my yield on the far right. 2 pyruvates with some water, 2 ATP, and 2 NADH. So when we look at phosphorylation, which is the breaking of a phosphate or the addition of a phosphate onto ADP to make ATP. It actually occurs within an enzyme, ATP synthase, which we talked about before. This is just a summary of the process. If you want to pause it here and take a look at that, that would be great. What happens to the pyruvate? So I split my glucose into two molecules, and then the question is, how do I use those to further my cellular respiration process? Basically what happens is my three products, right? I make pyruvate, I make NADH, and I make ATP. The ATP is going to be utilized somewhere else, but the NADH interacts with the pyruvate. It removes hydrogens and it makes something called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is a usable form of pyruvate for the rest of the cellular respiration process. Before the citric acid cycle, so the second part can start, pyruvate has to be turned into acetyl-CoA or acetyl coenzyme A. This basically links glycolysis to the citric acid cycle. This step is carried out by a multi-enzyme complex that catalyzes the three reactions. Basically, this is just a reaction that is completed using an enzyme. Basically, I go from glucose to pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, and then I can use it in the other two parts of my cellular respiration process. This also shows the location. We know that pyruvate is made in the cytosol, and then pyruvate is moved into the mitochondria to using a transport protein to create acetyl-CoA. Once it's in there, it's going to be once it's in the mitochondria, it's going to be turned into acetyl-CoA. Again, this is looking at what happens to the pyruvate. So glycolysis yields two pyruvate molecules. Some of it is going to be converted into lactic acid, some of it into acetaldehyde, and then some of it is going to be turned into acetyl-CoA, which aids in the other parts of cellular respiration. Again, a summary of the whole thing. We've just talked about the blue box and about the pink box as well. We're going to move on and talk about the other two boxes after, and that is that.